podcast. My name is Michael Kraft. I'm a senior sales engineer here at Augmentt, and I'll be kind of, I guess, the MC for today. But then we have David Haynes with us as well. I will let David introduce himself because he's the I don't know, he's the guru here at Augmentt that can do a little bit of everything. But I will let him give you guys his official title and let him kick things off.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm David Haynes. I've had the pleasure of chatting with a number of people on this call. I'm the information security officer here at Augmentt. As part of my responsibilities, I also do a lot of work with the engineering team when it comes to understanding GDAP and how to implement it, and also working with MSPs a lot on support calls and onboarding calls to help get GDAP better understood across the industry there with the partners that we deal with. I was chatting with someone this week about this webinar. Their comment was GDAP's been out for almost a year now, kind of a little bit late for us to be talking about this. But from the conversation that we've had with MSPs, I think a lot of people saw Microsoft make comments, notices, hey, this is coming, but it didn't really pay attention deep into how it's going to impact their day to day. And honestly, it's kind of like a confusing plate of spaghetti for the people just getting into it. So hopefully this will help clarify sort of what GDAP is, why Microsoft did it, and how it plays into your role as an MSP for security and also managing your tenant's environment. And with that said, I'm going to share my screen and we'll kind of dive into it.
And
this
I
is
think, David, to your point of being like, that Microsoft came out with GDAP a while back. I think this is a good time to have a webinar about this anyway, because, it came out about a year ago, but Microsoft has been forcing people into it. And a lot of your North American partners, you guys already know, like Microsoft has already started doing that. But for some of our partners across the globe, it's something new to them as well. So I think, this is a good time for us to get into GDAP and go over it with our partners. So sorry, David, go ahead.
No, absolutely. Microsoft, if you're in your partner center and you see MLT relationships, and we'll get into that, that's Microsoft kind of pushing people out of it. So Microsoft CSP, cloud service provider, everybody should be relatively familiar with this. This is the platform that lets you, in a single portal, get access to your tenant's environment to do administrative tasks and have access into their environment without having to create individual user accounts. And Microsoft's first implementation of it was DAP, delegated admin privileges. And while that was a huge benefit to the MSP space, there was a lot of problems with it. I'm sure we're all familiar with the SolarWinds incident a number of years ago, and a contributing factor to that was DAP and the level of access that DAP gave the attackers and what it gives MSPs in general. It was really fixed on two permissions, global admin or help desk admin. And let's be honest, everybody picked global admin because people didn't want to hamstring themselves. Everyone might be a little 95% picked global admin. It was an indefinite relationship timeline. The invitation link was the same for all, so it made it really easy to deploy out. But there was no granular aspect of who could do what and when. And so that's when Microsoft, post SolarWinds, and they'd already been working on this a little bit, but they accelerated the timeline, came up with GDAP, granular delegated admin privileges. And so that lets you create a custom relationship based on what you're actually going to be doing in your tenant's environment. It does put a timeline on how long that relationship lasts. Max is 2 years, 730 days. You can auto extend it as long as you don't pick global admin permissions. And then it's custom per tenant, custom per security group. And we're going to get into how the security groups play into your own security stack and your client's security. And then also how it plays into some of their tools like PIM and how the workload that comes into that.
So, David, what if I know we talked about how Microsoft is transitioning people over, but what if you don't transition over? So what if you're just you want to stick with DAP, you don't want to switch over to GDAP? Is that an option? And what happens if you don't create those relationships?
So again, one of the beautiful things with DAP, you got the global admin permissions. You're able to do anything and everything within the tenant's environment. Microsoft really doesn't want you doing that, because if one MSP gets breached or a downstream system provider like SolarWinds gets breached, and allows the attacker to get into people's CSP environments, that global admin permission can be abused across, if you're a smaller MSP, dozens of tenants, larger MSPs, hundreds of tenants. So that's really where attackers aren't going to try to go after a single company. They're going to try to go after the juicier targets of like MSPs and solution providers. So Microsoft's going to kick you over from DAP to GDAP. And so that's you'll start to see, if you haven't created a GDAP relationship yet in your environment, you'll see MLT underscore with a GUID after it, and that's their least privileged set of roles. That's a forced relationship change there. And then 30 days after MLT comes out, they're going to expire the DAP relationship. So the nice thing is, I mean, Microsoft's already going to create these relationships for you. And in general, the roles that you get in your tenant's environment by default are going to be sufficient for most MSPs to do most like L1, L2, maybe a little bit of L3 help desk tasks. You'll be able to see everything with Global Reader, but you won't be able to do things like conditional access policy administration, compliance administration, things like that MSPs are really pivoting to away from like a day-to-day management, exchange management, SharePoint management, to like an MSSP doing more security focused work. And that's going to be hamstringed by the MLT relationship. So it's really important, if you haven't already created GDAP relationships and you're still using DAP, especially people in the Southern Hemisphere, Australia, New Zealand, and in Asia. Microsoft hasn't made that started quite as aggressively pushing people over yet, like they have in North America. But that's where it's going to come into play. This whole thing goes away or this limitation goes away if you're still using individual user accounts in each tenant with global admin permissions. But we'll get into the like why that's a bad practice. I'm sure most people already understand the bad practices there.
So, I mean, essentially, like one day I could log into my partner portal, or not partner portal, but go to manage one of my clients and not have the same rights that I had before if I don't accept the transition and do what I need to do. Okay.
Exactly. And if you still have DAP, you can still, if you are using the CSP portal properly, you don't have individual like GA accounts in the tenants that you're managing, the way Microsoft would prefer people to do their work. You can still create the new GDAP relationship and then go approve it yourself. Kind of side skirts having to send a request to 50 of your customers saying, hey, can you click on this link? We all know that those emails get lost, forgotten about, and you have to chase that. But if you wait until DAP becomes GDAP in your environment, then you lose that permission in that environment. So the downside of waiting for Microsoft, things that you won't be able to, how does that affect your ability within Augmentt? Because a lot of MSPs, you can still connect to Augmentt with your MLT relationship, but that means that even if they're your tenant's licensed for it, we won't be able to pull any P1 or P2 alerts or do any P1 or P2 actions. So that's anything that you would do in the Defender portal, in the identity management for conditional access policies. Our quick baselining and our posture templates will be impacted as well. So yeah, limited threat alerts, limited user management, and threat report data. So it really does limit you to more help desk tasks than being that wider security conscious partner that the MSP industry is pivoting to over the last 12 to 18 months, especially with a tool, integrating a tool like Augmentt into your stack. Augmentt you're still going to be able to pull all the data because, like on the last slide, it does contain the global reader permission. And we do actually see this come up a fair bit within our support team of, hey, we've integrated to Augmentt and we can see everything, but when I go and make a change in particular postures, it errors out. And that's because the posture that the user was trying to change was, for example, like admin MFA, they were trying to edit a conditional access policy to make sure that they're including all users. And they were unable to do so because they were using they didn't have enough permissions because of the relationships. If all of this is, if you're starting to feel a little complicated and messy, just wait. There's more layers to it. But hopefully it'll all come together at the end. A big component of it is security through segregation. So, and the Microsoft best practice for setting up your CSP is actually to have your have an separate enter environment from your MSP's environment as your CSP account, and then have your MSP account be a customer of that CSP account. So you can see here like partner global account, and then you have locations. But you can imagine this as MSP CSP account, and then your main account down below. That lets you prevent any users in your MSP who don't need to be going into tenants' environments doing actions. They're never going to be able to have access to do that. So like your sales team, your marketing team, they're likely never going to need conditional access policy or conditional access administrator in your customer's environment. So segregating it out is Microsoft's best practice. Having worked with dozens and dozens of MSPs across and looking at hundreds of different integrations within Augmentt, I would say 2 or 3% of our partners have it set up this way. So don't panic if your MSP account is your top level CSP account. It's not unusual. But I just wanted to call it out that that's the way Microsoft would like people to have it set up.
But now if you do what Microsoft suggests and say you separate it or like you kind of segment it out like that and have kind of the multi-tiered approach, do you lose any benefits from not having, say, like your just CSP top level account?
No, I'm not like I'll admit I'm not the most familiar with the way in which the reseller licensing agreements work within Microsoft, but everything that I've read in documentation and heard from MSPs is that it's all owned by the same organization, so all of your benefits will persist for your licensing agreements and your reseller options.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. There's also the other benefit is you might want to have your day-to-day office staff in your MSP have a little bit more flexibility in the where they can access your environment. Like maybe they do flexible work from home, your sales team, your marketing team. So you can allow them access to your own internal data. But if you want your level 3 techs or your security team to only be able to access customers' environment, you can really lock it down with security conditional access policies in a way that's much easier to audit and review than having multiple conditional access policies where you use like what if to see who's applied to what, when, and where within the same environment. So security through segregation. So especially for MSPs who are relatively new into the security space, getting into and trying to like understand what GDAP is and how Microsoft is envisioning this gets deployed out. The fundamental concepts that come up time and time again are the concept of least privilege access, role-based access control, and just-in-time permissions. So the first two, we just added the licensing requirements there. Just your average basic licensing. Personally, I really like seeing MSPs with a P2 license. I don't like the fact that Microsoft gates it by licensing as a fee, but P2 licensing gets you PIM, privileged identity management, and we'll get into why that's a really, really cool feature for security conscientious MSPs to really make sure that their customers' environments are secure should they get a breach themselves. But the first two, you can do that without Microsoft licensing. And so the idea with least privilege access is just like you don't give everybody at your MSP global admin rights to your own tenant, you shouldn't give your techs global admin rights to your customer's tenant. So you divide the permissions out into security groups by the roles for which title that person is likely to need. So security group 1 has 5 permissions, 2 has 10 roles, 3 has security group 3 has 12 roles. Each of those users can be a part of multiple security groups. So if this is your level 2 techs with here, they might have security group 1 and 2, or maybe just 1 or 2. So you can really customize it based off of who's going to be doing what in which environment, and it lets you tailor it to the actions that those people are expected to do on a daily basis. A number of MSPs have reached out recently for their SOC. They're working on getting their SOC 2 compliance. We went through this a number of years ago, and a big component of SOC is demonstrating role-based access control. So does the role that the user is assigned, the title of their job, have a set of permissions that is standardized and auditable for privilege creep and escalation paths through there. So definitely something that people should be aware of and implement.
Yeah, I was gonna say this seems like, I mean, it does seem like a lot of work, right? Like it's like rather than just giving everyone global admin access, actually separating things out. And I know it's so much easier just to do global admin access, as opposed to setting up segregated groups where they have limited roles. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess like my thing is like if I took my car to have it worked on it, by my mechanic, I'm going to give him my car keys. I'm not going to give him the keys to my house and my storage building and everything else. So I get it, but it just seems like a lot of work.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that it's a lot of work up front, and it's primarily done in the partner center. And the partner center is just a fabulously frustrating tool to use, that I know MSPs just love. But it's hard work up front, but it's less work than dealing with your MSP being the source of breach because of failures within your team to manage security, or like there's just so many different avenues for attack, and breaking out least privilege roles makes it a lot more. It reduces the surface of attack to make it much easier to control, and it's kind of a set it up once and forget about it, with minimal changes. You go into your
Right.
partner center, you create the relationships, you add the security groups, and you leave it as is. Um,
Yeah.
so and then yes, what PIM for those of you who have a P2 license, if you don't have a P2 license, PIM is really, really cool. One, it makes role-based access control a little bit easier, but that can be done within your tenant with through groups, because you can assign roles to groups. But the big one is just-in-time permissions. Time and time again, especially during our onboarding, like Michael can talk about this, the integrated user for Augmentt needs to have global admin permissions for us to be able to deploy out the app across your tenants. That's not a thing that we want. It's a requirement from Microsoft. And so with using PIM, you can time gate the permissions on that user to an hour, a day, a week, whatever you want. And so for a temporary amount of time, that user has access to those roles. And that control can be pre-approved, or it can require secondary approval. And so your team can have access to the security groups that have the permissions as defined in your partner center, and then temporarily get access to those higher level permissions in a way that's either pre-approved. Yeah, you are level 2 tech. You're probably going to need to do conditional access policy management in your organization. You can go in, hey, I would like to access to that security group, and have it automatically be added to my user for 8 hours. That way, at the end of the day, that falls off my user account. And then if my user gets breached in the middle of the night, admins in that enter environment get notified saying, hey, Michael just requested level 2 security group access. Is he doing a late night project? Probably not. Let's go in and block that. Or if you have higher security requirements, those security groups can require additional permissions. Oh, we do actually have a relationship that has global admin security groups, but to get access to that, it requires you making a request in PIM, and then from there, um, that goes off to an admin for approval. So it gives you that extra level of security. And that same concept can be actioned by any of the other integrated apps. Like if you're using Roost or Augmentt or anything, PIM is just such a really, really cool tool that you don't get that ability without it.
But that you said that PIM requires a P2 license for Microsoft, which I know P2 licenses aren't cheap, but
Yeah.
would you need to assign a P2 license to all of your users that you're going to be assigning like PIM permissions to, or would you like how like yeah? So like, does everyone need a P2 license? I guess is the question.
Microsoft says yes.
Right. But
You don't, but to get access to those features, you don't need everyone to have that license. But it's Microsoft terms of service say you do. I'm going to
gotcha.
leave it at that. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna
We're not gonna
give guidance one way or the other. But I do know many MSPs who just purchase one P1 license, one P2 license, whatever they want. And that's the dice that they roll. That's within their comfort level. No,
okay.
within their risk tolerance.
Yeah. So theoretically, you could assign one user with a P2 license and have all these nice features.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
exactly.
we didn't say that. We're just theorizing here.
Yeah, yeah. Not Microsoft device. That component wasn't. Just going back, one thing that's come up to this, like this whole concept of least privilege access, there's and granular access is there's a lot of different opinions on how to set this up. I've seen some MSPs go super, super deep and say one role gets one security group and they manage it to that granular of a level. Completely valid if you wanted to take it to the next level. What Microsoft wants you or is expecting though is more like this, where each group that a user can be part of is connected to a set number of roles. Those users can be part of multiple security groups to get them access to different roles. And that ties back to applications within your environment. Like I'm sure many of you have heard us say, you need admin agents as a security group connected to the integrated user. This is part of it. So that way the security group gets the roles attached to it that then flow into your tenant's environment for us to pull data.
And not to derail you, David, but it's just because it's applicable to what we're talking about right now. Nick posted, well, it's not a question, it's a statement, and it's actually quite nice. He was saying that MSPs are provided up to 50 P2 licenses for free from Microsoft as long as you have any Microsoft partner benefits. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. So, like with
yeah.
that, no excuse. Every MSP should be deploy up P2, and it's such a great way to level up your security and really lower the like the surface area of potential attack, because when people aren't using when people don't need the permissions, they don't have them. And the higher level permission, and so if that user gets breached, the attacker can't do anything, or the things that they can do is very limited to like maybe the L1 permissions are permanently assigned, but the L2, L3 need secondary approval. So it's really, really essential in my opinion, and it's free now. So yeah, we put this together as an example. This is an opinion-based piece here, and we put it together pretty quickly. It's going to depend on how your organization's set up. You might not have different departments. People might be doing different, like wearing multiple hats. Like your L3 might be doing security and compliance work. They might not be different people, but you set them up in like L1. So these security groups are on the relationship in the partner center. So you go in and the security groups, L1, L2, L3, billing, security compliance, those are created in your Enter environment. And then in the partner center, you would connect these security groups to the permissions from the relationship. So there's that manual process there. Lighthouse as a tool lets you do some templating and basic stuff there. Augment's working on a tool to make this much more efficient. And hopefully by the time our third webinar in this series comes out, we'll be able to preview the demo of that, which is very exciting. But again, you go through L1 has these 3 permissions, L2 these 4 or 5, and so on. And then people can either be permanently assigned access to those security groups or request specific permission.
And this kind of goes back, I think, to earlier we were talking about like privileged identity management, and even like I brought up the fact that you wouldn't give your mechanic the keys to your house. Same thing here. Like if someone like is on your finance team, there's no reason for them to have global admin, of course, but also no reason for them to even have like application admin. So
Yeah.
yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah. And yeah, you give your mechanic the keys to your car, but if they're looking through your mailbox, it's a little weird.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, start rooting through your phone. So real and again, if this all seems still pretty abstract, we intentionally organized this webinar series to be, let's talk about the concepts of GDAP, why it exists, and where it comes into play. Our next webinar is going to be taking these concepts and showing you how to build them in Entra, and answering questions in that regard. So if you're feeling a little lost, I've had probably a dozen conversations with people on our team here trying to unravel GDAP, and I still get questions from those people. So it's not unusual to feel like this. But Mike, why should MSPs care?
Why should, yes, I mean, well,
Yeah.
I mean, first off, I think, I know we keep bringing this up, but the whole global admin thing, if all my techs have full blown access to everything, that, opens the door to a breach like we saw with SolarWinds. But yeah, so I mean, being able to, add that value, but then not just that, but even on the business side, when you're up against another MSP and maybe you're trying to win a client, if you have all this in place already and you're able to articulate that to the client, how your techs are only going to have the privilege that they need, they're not going to have full-blown access to everything in their environment. There's that peace of mind that you can add. Plus, it's just better for business. I mean, if you've got a nice, clean Microsoft environment that, I mean, even if, not that we want to deal with customers, firing us, but even, say you move on from a client, a new MSP comes in and they look at how you're set up and they're like, oh, wow, they knew what they were doing. They've got everything set up right. Well, the customer's going to say, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have fired that MSP. Maybe I should go back. I mean, it's just one of those things. You always want to be, the best at what you do. And I think by implementing GDAP and being able to add this value as a business, once again, being able to articulate that to your clients is one thing. But if you are able to do that, just really being able to show them how you do have their security at the top of your mind, and you are not just preaching it to them, but also practicing it within your own environment. So yeah, I think this is definitely something that could set you apart from some of the competition. I mean, I have a good friend, very good friend of mine. He is an MSP. We rarely talk business, but every now and then I have questions because I do like to know how he's doing things. And like one of the things that he brought up is that he just does global admin per client. So he'll have a global admin account. He sets it up in the customer's environment, and that way, if the customer moves on or he moves on, just sever the connection, get rid of that global admin. Which, yeah, you could do that, but if you can do it all through CSP with the privileges that are needed and not just the excess privileges, it just makes it so much cleaner. And yeah, it is a lot more work up front, but then long term, once you have those different roles set up, it's just a matter of moving users in and out of those roles. I think long term, it actually makes it easier for you
Yeah.
with the business.
You have just that build on that point. Let's say you have 50 tenants. You want to add a new tech in. Rather than going and creating 50 individual accounts across 50 tenants, you now create one account in your Entra environment and attach them to one security group in your Entra environment, and they're up and running. They're ready to go. And then should that tech leave, you no longer have to remember, oh, did I take them out of that tenant? Did I clean everybody out? Spending that time. But then yeah, it's think of it like a construction company. If you have a really messy work site, it's really easy for someone, a competitor of yours, to come in and say, oh, we'll do a much better job of keeping you clean
Yeah.
than your current crew. And then on the flip side, makes it a lot harder for other MSPs to point at your flaws and say you're not doing security properly. You don't know Microsoft best practices for MSP management, because you're living it, actioning it. So it's both a a tool for your sales team to leverage, and then also a defensive mechanism for you to show that off. And on that, just like breach liability when not using best practices.
Yeah.
I'm sure that big top of news is the $1 million lawsuit that I've only just started digging into like the case there. But law firm suffered a ransomware attack, is now suing their MSP for $1 million. And so it's going to a core component, I'm sure, of both the insurance claim that the MSP is going to make against their cyber insurance, and then also in their lawsuit defense, is that we communicated with the customer in advance, like, hey, you need to manage these security threats. Here's copies of the Augmentt threat report that we sent you multiple times, telling you we need to change the way you're doing things. We need to enforce MFA. But then also, here's proof that we were following best practices across the board for security, that we don't have hanging GA accounts, that we're managing user permissions efficiently. Because insurance companies are going to look for any opportunity to not pay out.
Oh yeah. Well, and even Microsoft can drop you. I mean, if you're your customers are getting breached and it's due to your negligence and you just have global admins running wild, Microsoft can just, no, that's it, cutting ties, no more partner access. So, being able to, show like I've done everything I need to do is once again just it's best practice. And and you can see like even on this list, like where it says vendors will require GDAP, I'm already seeing that too. When I'm setting up doing onboardings with some of our MSPs, I see where other vendors have already set up GDAP relationships or have required MSPs to set up GDAP relationships. So it's already here. So it's, if you're going to make the transition, might as well do it now before you're being forced to do it and kind of scrambling. At this point, you can
also do it smartly, do it well.
Yeah.
Really think about what you as an MSP are offering, what roles you need, and then segregate it out efficiently.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
That's GDAP in a nutshell. Hope that was useful for people who aren't super familiar with it. If you are more expert in it, hope it kind of touched on some neat concepts that you might not have been aware of.
Perfect. Well, thank you, David. You definitely taught me quite a few things. Hopefully everyone else on the call learned some things as well. Once again, next week, we'll be doing a deeper dive and actually getting into the Microsoft portal. And David's can kind of show you what he told you about today. And then our third and final webinar in the trilogy of Microsoft CSP and GDAP will show you a new tool that we will hopefully have by then, should have by then, available in the Augmentt portal that will actually assist you with setting up some of these GDAP relationships. Mm-hmm. So yeah, thank you guys for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, David, and we will speak soon.
Yeah. Talk to you about.
All right. Bye, guys.